Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this late afternoon. I'm Lauren Bairnsfather. I'm director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. And I know that some of you have come to our programs in the past, but not everyone, so I'm grateful to have you with us now. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh connects the horrors of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism with injustices of today. Through education, the Holocaust Center empowers individuals to build a more civil and humane society. And this year we are marking our 40th anniversary year. We are living in one of the most divisive times many of us has ever witnessed. It's also 2 years and a few days since October 27th, 2018, the date of the attack on the Tree of Life building and the 3 congregations that met there, all of which lost members to the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in US history. This has been a very serious week for the Pittsburgh community, and I'm just grateful that we can be together. At a time when so many forces are pulling us apart, the Holocaust Center always looks for spots of light, and we find light in our common humanity. No one delivers this message better than survivors of the Holocaust. In the early 1990s, renowned Holocaust testimony expert Lawrence Langer conducted over 80 hours of interviews with Boston area Holocaust survivors to establish a living memorial to the Holocaust. The testimony tapes were placed in a metal closet where they sat inexplicably for more than 20 years. In 2016, experienced film producer Harvey Bravman, working with a local official, resurrected and digitized the tapes. Harvey then began working on a feature-length documentary based solely on the testimony tapes that had been locked away for decades. He painstakingly worked through the testimony to produce a film, Soul Witness, that eloquently speaks to their experiences. The film was completed in late 2018 and has sold out several theatrical screenings, and right now we're doing this virtually. I hope many of you have watched the film, which has been available to you. In November 2019, the film premiered in Pittsburgh to raise funds for the 3 congregations affected by the shooting. If you have not seen the film, you will be able to view several clips during our program this evening. We chose today, November 1st, in a time of worry and fear, caused in part by a global pandemic which has unsettled our lives since last winter, to come together to honor the words of Holocaust survivors. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome the filmmaker Harvey Bravman and a panel including 3 daughters of survivors featured in the film Soul Witness. Our panelists include Cheryl Leffman, Dina Salzberg, and Janet Bloom. They will discuss the process of bringing the testimonies to light and what survivor testimony can teach us for the future. We will hear from each of our panelists, watch footage from the film, then I will ask some questions, and then we will take audience questions. And I ask you to put your questions into the Q&A, which you'll find at the center of your screen at the bottom. The purpose of this event is to have a break from the heightened rhetoric of the moment. We're not getting political today. We're coming together to appreciate each other's humanity through the words of Holocaust survivors. It is my pleasure to welcome our esteemed panelists, and I'm grateful to be with all of you right now.
The screaming and the yelling, if children were crying, they were beaten. And the mothers and the fathers couldn't do nothing. This is a terrible thing. For parents to see your children get beaten or killed, or the children see the parents get killed and beaten, and you cannot do a thing. I don't know if somebody doesn't experience this. Even I say the story, I think I still don't say it right, because you really cannot express yourself. Well, how bad this was, how terrible this was. It's no words you really can say what they did to us, what they took away from us. But one time you have your family, so much love in the family. Okay, not everybody was rich. No, we had so much love from our family, from the parents, from the grandparents, cousins, uncles. I mean, I had maybe 100 cousins, uncles, aunts. Our family was very big, from my father's side, from my mother's side. And here, I'm just all by myself, all alone with my mother. And I tried to talk to my mother. It was very hard to talk because your tongue is dry, you're all dry, you have no strength even to say something. Now I tried to my mother to say, Ma, if the German's gonna kill me, don't cry. It's good. I'm gonna feel very good. I really tell you, Ma, I'm gonna feel good. I'm gonna go with Daddy's, with my brother. I be with my whole family. I don't have to suffer no more. I can't take it. I can't take the suffering. It's too much. Not just what I suffer, just to look around me. Everybody is suffering. It's a world of suffering. So my mother squeezed my hand. She couldn't even talk. She said, don't worry, my child. Everything gonna be okay. Everything gonna be okay. I said, good, if you think like this, good. I was very worried for my mother. I don't know, I didn't worry so much for myself. I worried for my mother. I loved my mother so much.
Thank you all for watching that. And Rose Mura, who gave that testimony, she gave the longest testimony that we used for the film. She spoke for 7 hours, and it was perhaps the greatest interview I've ever seen in my life. I want to thank the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh for doing this, for putting this on. And today, sort of November 3rd, not only is it the election day, but it's the 1-year anniversary of my being in Pittsburgh and screening the film and trying to raise money for the 3 congregations that were affected by the Tree of Life, the murders that took place at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And the year before that, the film, a rough cut of the film, screened in Westchester County, Bedford, New York. And we had a sellout audience, and it was just a couple of days after October 27th. And everyone in the theater was obviously affected by the news that we had heard and shocked. And so to be able to come back the next year and actually get to meet people in the Pittsburgh area and spend time with Lauren, and I hope that soon I could get on a JetBlue plane and see you all. Brookline, Massachusetts is very similar, I think, to the Squirrel Hill community in Pittsburgh, especially in the 1980s, very large Jewish population. And there were a lot of Holocaust survivors that were still alive in Brookline in the late 1980s. And these 2 amazing people, Leon Satinstein, who was what we call a liberator. He had seen the liberation of a concentration camp, Dachau, when he was a a young intelligence officer for the U.S. military. He was with the Army, and Regina Barshak, who was a survivor from France. And they urged the residents in their community to create a living memorial that was based on testimonies from Holocaust survivors that lived in their community. Now, at this time, it had been 45 years since the war ended, and survivors still had not most survivors had still not shared their stories publicly, and most of them hadn't even shared really what happened with their own family members. And I think, we talk about a little bit in the film, but people were unwilling to listen at the time, probably because it's tough to listen to things that's tough to listen to, I guess. But so it had been 45 years. Lawrence Langer, who Lauren talked about, now is considered the foremost authority on Holocaust testimonies, and he had been studying them and started a class in them, teaching for Simmons College in Boston. But these were his first video interviews, and so the project took 6 years. 36 survivors were interviewed and 3 liberators, and it's hard to know exactly how many hours, but there were at least 80 hours, and we're just trying to figure it out recently. We think that probably 87, 88 hours of testimony. As Lauren mentioned, for reasons that are really complex, I guess, they just ended up in a closet. And with the help of a lot of people, I was able to find a way and convince the community to let me take them to Philadelphia and resurrect them, digitize them, and sort of recover them, because they had been sitting in this metal closet with no temperature control for a couple of decades. So they were in pretty rough shape. I spent 7 to 9 months just living in the testimonies, 12, 14 hours a day. I wouldn't recommend this to people at home, but and I think at the time that I was doing it, and even up to a year, maybe even 2 years afterwards, when I thought about the testimonies, I thought about them in terms of how hard it was to get through all of that. But now I realize, or it's just so clear to me, the effect that has had in my life. Not only these people that, if you see the film, these people that are in the film are people that will be with me and be part of my family forever. And I think the people that you're going to meet tonight, who were children of those people, will be in my family as well. And there's something about allowing yourself to be present, to listen to someone else's pain. And I think it's a gift to them. And then in time, you realize that it's a gift to you. And that really, I'm a much better person. At the time, and I think it's time to pass off the baton, but at the time for me, I had never made a feature-length film. I was not an expert in the Holocaust. I'm Jewish. I had read books about the Holocaust. That doesn't make you an expert. And we had booked a theater to show the rough cut of the film that we had to sell, 400 and something tickets to. And we needed the money to keep the project going. And there was just so much pressure on me. And that, and listening to the stories, I think sort of overwhelmed me. And you just don't realize at the time, sometimes when someone's given you a gift, And so people were, thought I had been through a war and were praising me over it. And I really hadn't been through a war. I'd been handed a gift. And I hope other people we can share that gift with others. The film is at soulwitness.org. If you rent or if you stream the film, 30% of it goes back to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lauren. And I can't wait for you to meet the next 3 women you're about to meet.
Hi, everyone. I would like to thank Lauren for hosting at the Pittsburgh Center for Holocaust Education. And I'd also like to thank Harvey for bringing this to the forefront, because it's a story that can't be lost, and to preserve the memory of the survivors and what happened to our Jewish population. My name is Janet Bloom, and my mom was featured in the clip that you just saw. Both of my parents were Holocaust survivors. They were the sole survivors of their families. No one else survived. It was hard for my dad to talk about it. It was painful and emotional, but my mom was ready to talk. And when Leon approached her to do this testimony, she was raring to go with it. But she also gave testimony to facing history and ourselves in the late 1970s. And so many students and other people had seen my mother's testimony. But my mother was an extraordinary person. She survived against all odds. As you just saw in the clip, it was, quite emotional for me, to hear her. And I've seen this film several times. It was just, it's heart-wrenching to hear your mother talk about her last few words with her mother and how they were separated. I know that, my mom really gave quite a testimony, as Harvey had mentioned, in the 7 hours that he had gone through. If you watch the film Soul Witness, you'll also hear how she talks about falling in love. But from when my mom especially would talk about the Holocaust, she had said that, and it happens to coincide with the shooting in Pittsburgh. It was October 27th. And when I recall October 27th, 2 years ago, that there was a shooting at the synagogue, it's like history repeating itself. My mother said that on October 27th, they were living in Radzin, Poland, and the Nazis stormed into my grandparents' house, and 11 family members were shot. My mother jumped out the window with her little brother, and she jumped into a haystack, and her little brother was shot, and she saw, it was horror. And then she ran to a neighbor's house and hid under a pile of wood. And the Germans came running after and looking for her, and they said in German, "There's another dog, another Jew hiding somewhere." But she escaped. So I just wanted to bring out that both of my parents dodged many bullets, and they survived against all odds. They had hope for the future when they came to this country. And they rebuilt their lives, and proud of their family that they created, because what Hitler had done and their identity, everything was stripped away from them and the survivors, just because they were Jewish. So we have to preserve this legacy. And it's so vitally important for everyone to hear their stories. Not just the Jewish community, but everyone needs to learn the lessons of the past. And that was the message that my mom and my dad wanted people to know that this should not get lost, and the term never again, and to fight against anti-Semitism. So their testimonies are so important. So let's preserve their legacy. And that's my goal too. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dina Laufer-Salzberg, and I am a child of two survivors. My father, who, let him rest in peace, is featured in this film, Sole Witness, and my mother she was a survivor, along with two aunts and two uncles. Although I've never been to Pittsburgh, we were all very touched by the shooting, and at the time, I was very good friends with a former Pittsburgh person who some of you may remember, Sam and Goldie Weinrab, and who live in the Boston area, or actually Goldie has passed away. But Sam Weinberg, I know, did a lot of volunteer work while he was in Pittsburgh, spoke to children in different organizations. And while he was in Boston, he did the same. So I just wanted to acknowledge that connection between myself, Sam, and Pittsburgh. The film Sole Witness is like a dream come true for my parents. My father always said to us, especially on Passover, that he didn't understand why we were telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. He thought it was important for people to know his story and my mother's story and, millions of other people who lived through the Holocaust. If he were alive today, he wouldn't know what to say to Harvey for doing the work that he so dreamed of doing or having somebody else do. And I myself am very appreciative of everything that Harvey has done for us. Unfortunately, my parents did not speak a great deal about their experiences during the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, I learned more from watching their testimonials, which they both did. And even what you're going to see in the film today, I had no idea how my father existed all the years that, after the Holocaust. My father survived with one brother. He lost two brothers, a sister, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, but he had one brother. And both of them actually lived in Brookline, Massachusetts, right near each other. And my mother miraculously survived with her family. She came to this country with her mother, her father, and two sisters and a brother. And they were in hiding during the war, and grandfather was taken to Siberia, and then they were reunited after they were liberated. My father survived 5 concentration camps, and the way he survived the last one, which was Flossenburg, he was in Germany making airplanes, was that he had a beautiful voice, and he was 17 years old, and the Germans when they were marching to their labor camp, had him sing the German national anthem. And to be honest with you, I never even knew that my father knew the German national anthem. And towards the end of his life, he was hospitalized for something. And he became extremely delusional, thinking that he was in the concentration camp. Stood in a salute in his hospital room and started singing the German national anthem. At the time, I was called and came in, and I looked at him. It wasn't the same person. And I tried to calm him down. He said to me in Yiddish, he wanted me to go with him and hide because they were going to take us away and they were going to kill us. But he suppressed that for so many years. And it's amazing to me that he could. So I hope when you see this film, you'll think of all the survivors who are now gone, and remember that this is a story that needs to be told. And I'm going to pass it on to Cheryl.
Good evening, and thank you for hosting us. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my parents' background associated with the Holocaust, and then I want to focus a little bit more on their lives after the Holocaust. Both my parents were also Holocaust survivors. My mom was in hiding. First, she was hidden by a neighbor who had a Christian child. And so the neighbor hid my mother as another child. But then some other neighbors came and said, we know that you are harboring a Jew in your home and she's got to go. So my mother joined her mother in the forest with a cousin, and they lived underground for more than 2 years before liberation. And she and my mother were in a displaced persons camp, and then I'll link it to how they met my father. My dad, Henry, and I believe you'll see a little bit of his clip. He had 2 brothers, 2 parents, and unfortunately, the Nazis told my father's mother and 2 brothers to go to the right, and they went to the gas chambers. And my dad and his father were sent to a labor camp. And one night, this is going to be associated with the clip that you're going to see at some point this evening. A guard hit my father's father repeatedly, and he knew he was so badly hurt that he was not going to survive through the night. He made my father promise to live and to tell the story and to not let people forget that this can happen to humans, that, you know, one human can perpetrate this type of terror onto another. And so my father was liberated by the Americans, and he later in life met his liberator at a function that he was at. Someone called out, if you were at, you know, this particular labor camp, please raise your hand. And my mother heard that, and she said, Henry, you were there. And she met this liberator at this function, and this liberator also lived in Massachusetts, where my parents lived. And there was an incredible, overwhelming, emotional scene. My dad just wouldn't stop hugging this amazing man, and it was quite a reunion. But I wanted to get to that my parents met at displaced persons camp, and they were married in Boston, and they went on to have a really meaningful and thoughtful life. And that despite immense trauma, they were still resilient enough. They had the strength, the survivor strength, to impart really meaningful lessons to us kids. And, to say, hey, look, we made it. We're still here despite the Nazis' best efforts. And I think a lot of lessons can be learned from that and from all of the voices of the survivors that were part of this witness testimony. So like everyone else, I too am forever grateful to Harvey for having the courage and strength to make this really important documentary. Thank you.
We thought that the Germans are trying to scare us. We thought that the trucks are loaded with mummies, with mannequins, one on top of the other, a couple of hundred on each truck. But these were not mannequins, these were dead people.
They took a lot of people, Jewish people, and they made them big holes, graves. Later, after they finished, they told them to lay down in the graves. The same people, what they dig. Other people came, they took the dirt and buried them alive. The ground was going up and down, up and down.
And I see this until today. I see the trucks moving, and I see the dead people on the trucks.
Was that the worst thing you saw? The buried alive,
Yeah,
the people?
this was bad. This was very, very bad. The ground was going up and down, till they died.
Do you still think about that today?
All the time. Every single day you have to eat. A lot of time I dream. I cannot sleep. I cannot sleep. I cannot sleep.
And my father, he kept on saying to me, remember, remember my son, you must live. You must survive. You must survive. And I'll be with you. I'll be with you. You're going to find your brothers. You're going to find your mothers. I swore after my father's death, no matter what, I must survive and to take revenge. I must. And I did everything possible to survive. And I survived, I did.
And I walked with my head up, and I thought, now I am going to kill. I'm going to kill these Nazi Schweins. These are not human beings, this is not civilized people. These are murderers, Nazi murderers. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill anybody. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't harm anybody.
So incredibly powerful. So I want to thank everyone who's with us on our panel, Janet, Cheryl, and Dina. It's really brave of you to come out and to speak about your parents' experiences. We have a generations group in Pittsburgh that's very active, and just as you are, they carry on the legacy of their survivor parents, and it's so important. And the stories, when you tell them, have so much power. You are not the witnesses, but you are the witnesses to the witnesses, and that is your legacy as well. Harvey, you talked about how you were handed a gift. I was also handed a gift, in that I have known many Holocaust survivors in my life, beginning when I was young, and I actually grew up with Sam Weinreb. Sam Weinreb was in White Oak and in McKeesport, where I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh. And I knew him, from the time that I was very young, and I'm glad that he had someone like you helping him out when they relocated to the Boston area. I want to ask a few questions. One thing that's really striking to me, and we saw testimony now from a number of survivors, clips from the film, and we also heard from Harvey that these are, in many cases, the first time that these survivors told their stories, and also the first time that Lawrence Langer was conducting interviews. Really, it's a landmark moment in recording survivor testimony, but clearly it was so difficult for them. Now, and we do still have survivors in Pittsburgh, which is so lucky, but now when they tell their stories, they've told them many times, and it's not such an outpouring of emotion. What is it like to see your parents in this film and to see those testimonies from all those years ago? Maybe we'll start with Janet, because I see you first on my screen.
I think she's going to unmute.
Yes, there it is.
Sorry, my husband has a call here. So
my timing was perfect.
It's always emotional for me to hear my mom speaking, because she speaks right from the heart. And she spoke so eloquently. It's so compelling, because her testimony is such that it's riveting. And each time I hear it, it still hits hard. And, hearing her last words to her mother, it was really heart-wrenching, her mother was only 42 at the time, and then her mother was sent, they were in Auschwitz, they were in the cattle car when my mother spoke about this testimony. So she was in hiding with her mother for a while, and then they were captured. So both my parents were in concentration camps, and they met upon the liberation. But as you asked Lauren, how it is for me each time to hear it, it has an impact on me. My mother was my hero. She was everything to me. She was a wonderful role model, and she was a strong figure. She always was hopeful, but my mother had a quote, and I'd like to tell you what she had said.
Please.
When she was interviewed, she said, "I was liberated from the concentration camps, but they were not liberated from me." So she lived with it all her life, as all the survivors did. And when she came to this country, she wanted to tell the story. And she wanted to, tell people what happened, but people were saying, oh, we had the Depression, it's okay, you're lucky. But she said, I'm not lucky. You lose your whole family. So the fact that my mom had 3 children and, 5 grandchildren, and my parents didn't live to see 9 great-grandchildren. So, they would be, I know they're looking down on us and are proud of the family that they built. And, despite what the Nazis were trying to do, out of the ashes came life. But I want people to know what happened. I don't want anyone to say it didn't happen, because it is an important part of history and we have to learn from these lessons. And my parents always felt we have to speak out against anti-Semitism. There's no room for it. There's no place for hate or intolerance. We're a country of different nationalities, and it's important to embrace everyone. So my mother said she doesn't want to see hate come into effect, and she was concerned about her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, that the future would be promising for them. And education was important to my parents because their education was cut short and their identities were taken away and they were emblazoned with tattooed numbers. And I had sent you, I think it was Christina or Jackie, I sent a tape that Matt Damon, who had been a middle school student, heard my mother speak and how it affected his life. And he felt that history was no longer antiseptic. And he came face to face with my mother and then was in the film School Ties. So he wrote to my mother, and my mother remained very close to him. She was very proud of him bringing to the forefront about anti-Semitism and to speak out against hatred. So I did forward that to you.
Yes. And Jackie shared that on social media so that people could see it. And possibly people who are with us now are here because they saw that clip of your mother and Matt Damon.
Yes, and for him to, say, he remembered also how 11 family members were killed that night. As I said, unfortunately, it was the same day of the shooting in Pittsburgh. It was October 27th. So that was difficult when this occurred. It rang true to me what was going on in this lifetime. So, but I want to thank Harvey for bringing the testimonies, to the population now, so that everyone can hear these stories and actually see Holocaust survivors. Unfortunately, my mom passed away in 2003 and my dad 2006. So, I want to preserve everything, the legacy, as I mentioned before, and also with the survivor community in Pittsburgh and their children and grandchildren, that, we embrace one another and learn these lessons.
And I too am grateful to Harvey for bringing the film to Pittsburgh and developing this relationship with us at the Holocaust Center.
Yes.
Harvey and I really had a meeting of the minds over our deep respect for these interviews and for the words of the survivors and the pain that they went through to tell their stories for us, so that we could learn from them and we could hear them.
And it's interesting because I had seen the documentary that was taken when Leon Satinstein was involved in it, and it was on Brookline Cable, especially during Yom HaShoah. So I had seen pieces of it, and some parts my mother didn't want to have shown until after she passed away because it was really emotional for her. And she did include that in the sole witness. So Harvey had brought that piece of it to the film, and I want to thank him for doing that too.
I think I'm going to look and see what kind of questions we're getting so that I make the best use of the time that we have. So we do have a question from an audience member that's a very good one. First, she writes, "I'm sorry for what your parents went through. My question is, Do you feel that your parents' experiences during the war affected their parenting of you? And if so, how? So maybe I'll ask that of Cheryl.
That's a very deep question. So the short answer is yes, of course. You know, my parents were very young when they experienced the atrocities that they lived through. So they really didn't have a childhood themselves. So their model of parenting was based on what they wanted to see their family achieve and look like, because they weren't able to have a childhood. So they were informed by their experiences, and they wanted us to, in a sense, fulfill their dreams, because they weren't able to experience anything when they were children. So you know, they had certain guidelines, shall we say, protocols that they wanted to have in place, so that we had basically an all-knowing sense that we were part of a very important family. Family was of utmost importance to my parents. I also have two older brothers. They wanted to keep our nuclear family together and experience every single holiday, religious and secular holidays, and have a toast to life at all of these holiday celebrations, and through cooking and education and gatherings with other immigrant families, their Holocaust survivor friends. They built an extended network, an extended family, because basically their families were ripped from their arms. So absolutely, the answer is yes, that their experiences in the Holocaust shaped our upbringing.
Dina, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I think that, you know, some Holocaust parents were trying to be very Americanized and try to treat their children like the average, you know, American family. What I felt, and my mother had her parents were still alive, although they were very much, you know, Holocaust survivors who were in their 80s when they came here. My mother was very nervous and very protective. And, you know, I never went to overnight camp, for instance, because you just don't go to overnight camp because something could happen. Where my father, and many of you saw him with the yarmulke around his head, we grew up in a religious, you know, modern Orthodox household, and education, like Janet said, was very, very important. I had one older brother, and we went not only to Hebrew school, but we also went to Hebrew high school, and my brother went to Hebrew college. And so there was an expectation that we were going to keep that going. And my children all go to Jewish day schools. And I married a man who came from a family of a father who survived the Holocaust, and a mother that is American. So we sort of joke, and he'll say, well, you never went to camp. And I'll say, that's because your mother was American. That's why you got to go to camp. But I think definitely overprotective a bit. And, you know, education, school, was very, very important. And they were very proud anytime it was a graduation or whatever. But the other thing was, if there was a PTA meeting, my mother wasn't, so versed, she never went to college. But if there was a PTA meeting, she'd be the first one to volunteer. She would go to the meetings to meet with parent teachers for conferences because she wanted us to fit in. And she did what she could do. So just wanted to add that.
Well, so we've gotten through the Q&A questions. So thank you to everyone who asked them. And it's clearly not enough time to talk about everything that I would really love for us to talk about. But one thing that came up, Janet, in your comments, is about anti-Semitism now. And I would like to put a question to everyone, Harvey included, just your thoughts about the rising threat of anti-Semitism now and what we learn from survivors about the need to stand up to it and more about what your parents would have said. Harvey.
Yeah, I think a lot about that. And, really, I hate to quote myself, but sometimes, I just hope that this allows people an opportunity to become more present in the face of all kinds of injustice and intolerance. And I've spoken to a lot of, been a panelist to about this subject and talking to students, and students asking, how do I do my part to stop anti-Semitism? And I guess my thought is just to be intolerant to all forms of intolerance, and because it all sort of comes together, these verbal attacks on people that eventually become weaponized, and it's so painful when this happens, and my understanding is in Pittsburgh that's sort of what happened, that people's rhetoric just sort of weaponized this person to do this awful act. And I just hope that we can just, there's nothing we could do about the Holocaust, it's gone, but we can do a lot, I think, about how we treat each other. And I hope we do that.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add to that. I think this is how my parents felt, and it's my feeling as well, that education is the key. We have to start from a young age to educate parents too. A lot of parents aren't aware that the Holocaust occurred, or they don't know the term Auschwitz. We have to do this in the schools to ensure that all children learn about this, whether it's the genocide, the Armenian genocide, or whatever it is. People need to know that we cannot have this, that it's unacceptable to target a group of people because of their religion or their beliefs. We need to stop it. And I feel that education is important. That's why Facing History in Ourselves, which is based in Brookline, but it's national and international. So we need to do this for our children and future generations so that they know. I know when I was growing up, it wasn't in the history books, but it is so vitally important that we do this. So it's education. That's how I feel.
Thank you, Janet. Cheryl.
Well, I think just my 2 cents about what the voices and their recollections help us with today in combating hate and racism and all forms of intolerance is that we need to do our best to try to get to know people, people who are maybe not like us, come from different backgrounds, different gender, all the differences, and say hello one by one. Tell me your name, let's learn a little bit about each other, because usually when you break down the myths about what someone is like or what they believe in, boy, does that go a long way to just kind of quelling that anxiety that comes with stereotypes about people. And, I think these incredible testimonies, help the current generation to understand, look what can happen when you don't do that. Look what can happen when you uphold these, stereotypes about people, and you just demonize someone without getting to know who they really are and what they can contribute to your life. And I think that's sort of the underlying, another piece of the legacy of these testimonies, is that they can help us realize that, wow, by taking away somebody's liberty and lives, you're really doing that to yourself. And I think this is it's such a powerful messages that they've left us.
Dina.
I agree with both Janet and Cheryl, but one example of something my parents did, and I think they did it for me. When I was in high school applying to college, we have some good universities in Boston. I wanted to be a nurse, and that's what I am today. And I was applying to different schools, and my father said to me, go speak to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe was his rabbi. And this rabbi happened to be very involved with an organization called ROFA, where they help people from all over the world come to Boston for medical care. So here I was, a 17-year-old, with this grand rabbi with a long beard, and we meet in his office, and I said I want to be a nurse. Where will I go to school? God forbid I should go out of state, Right. So he came back to me and he said, for you, I think you should go to Boston College. Now, Boston College is a Jesuit college here in the Boston area. Good university, but there aren't very many Jewish people that go there, to be honest with you. So I came home, told my parents, this is what he suggested. And my father said, no, so that's where you'll go. You'll go to Boston College. So fast forward 2 years, there's a ceremony that you get. At the time, nurses wore caps. And the ceremony was going to be on a Saturday. So it's Shabbat. So I had a really good friend who was Italian. And I said to her, Diane, what am I going to do? It was at St. Ignatius Church. So she said, when everybody goes down on their knees, you'll just sit down on the seat. I said, okay. But then I thought to myself, how are my parents going to handle this? So because they don't drive on the Sabbath, they walked for about 1.25 miles or so. And they came to the ceremony at St. Ignatius Church. They stood in the back. My father had his yarmulke on. And it was nothing else. And I thought it was harder for them than it was for me. But, my father-in-law in later years said, how did you send her to a Catholic school? And even my friends thought I was going to, Boston University or a, regular secular school. I had to take a year of theology. I actually met with a Jesuit priest in his office, and we studied Hebrew, or I taught him Hebrew, So, that was it was a big deal. And I don't think the average person realized the whole thing, but my parents were very open-minded, and they were proud. She went to Boston College. Well, I just wanted to share that. If we had more of that, I think that would be very helpful in this world.
I love that story and all of your wisdom about really the times that we're living in now, where we see rising anti-Semitism and also a real reckoning with racial injustice in this country. And when we learn our history, so here's the education, and Facing History and Ourselves has a robust presence in Pittsburgh. We work with them and other places as well. Yeah, they're wonderful. But, you know, it's a time of reckoning. And when we learn our history and we learn the history of other places, some things are unavoidable. And so, I mean, we learn from the Holocaust what's right and what's wrong. And we also learn the dangers of indifference and silence. And we really owe a debt of gratitude to the survivors of the Holocaust who shared their stories with us so that we can be strengthened by their example. And on that note, as we have come to the end of our program, it went way too quickly. We have one last clip that we're going to play, and I'll invite our panelists to stick around with us, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Unless there's something you'd like to add, well, thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome. Nothing is coming to my memory now.
Well, we appreciate it very much, and I thank you again.
I'm glad to tell that other people will be able to hear these stories. Not too many people in my age are now alive, and shortly it will be no people that went through this. And it is good that these stories don't die, that somebody will be able to hear them.